Thanks for listening to another episode of the Business of Fun podcast. I am your host, Dave Wakeman. My guest today is the Dynamo of Dynamic Pricing himself, Nick Falzon. We have a great conversation. Let me tell you about it in just a moment. But before I do, let me remind you to check out my website. It's davewakeman.com. And check out the Talking Tickets newsletter, which if you are listening to this podcast, I cannot believe you haven't already read it and aren't a regular subscriber. You find it at talkingtickets.substack.com, or you can get it at my website, davewakeman.com. This episode's going live on December 15th. There's going to be some new stuff coming out in the newsletter on the website, appearances, things like that in the new year. So keep an eye on those two spots. So anyway, let me get to my conversation with Nick. Nick is a longtime friend of the newsletter, the podcast, of me. We laugh at the beginning about the time we got together in Sydney. And this was a great conversation because Nick has left a long career at Disney and he is out working on a bunch of different stuff. So I wanted to have a chance to talk to Nick about what he's up to. So we talked about a little bit about hospitality and tourism, long-form content creation. We talked about being prepared and how to use AI. We talked about the sales and marketing. We talked about mentorship, teaching. We talked about examples from Netflix and Broadway. We got into all kinds of interesting stuff, and this is a great conversation that I had with my buddy Nick Falzon on the Business of Fun. All right, I would like to welcome Nick Falzon to the Business of Fun podcast. Nick, what's up, man?
Hey there, Dave. How are you doing? It's been a long time since I've actually seen you in person.
It's true, and we had some technical difficulties, so we're like still only loosely seeing each other in person.
Exactly. Now I don't actually see you, but no, it's fun. It's good.
You relatively saw me. I was gonna lead with this one because I was reminded of it. I was going through some notes because I am a obsessive note taker about like when we were together at Angela's house in Sydney. And you were like going, "Oh my God, I couldn't do the podcast." Like your character on the podcast is so crazy. So I was like, want to go. Which I thought was amazing because I was like, I am totally playing a character when I do this, which is because the gig here is I need to inform and teach people things, but I also have to keep them entertained because it's not like, so I have to keep that going. But what I was going to do is I was also going to introduce you as, I believe the way that you got introduced in Australia was the Dynamo of Dynamic Pricing.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that is, that's a very kind claim.
I thought it was amazing, not just kind. Right? It was awesome.
Yeah, I've also I also do some teaching. I actually teach at Columbia School of the Arts. I teach in their theater management and producing track, and I teach on the topic of ticketing. But I've kind of like leveraged that to be the title of being professor. So I kind of use that as well every once in a while. But no.
If they give it to you once, you just accept it. It's like the BBC called me the king of tickets one time on like Radio 3 or whatever.
That would be at the top of my resume as soon as that was said.
Have you not seen me in long enough that you realize that like that is the first thing they lead with every time they announce me anywhere is the king of tickets?
Especially when you're trying to like clear customs and enter into the UK. That'd be great. Like, actually, no, I'm here as the king.
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, also the funny thing is that like King and I share a birthday, so our birthdays are the same day. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay. So, well, there might be something there then.
Yeah. Right. So I can be like, well, look, you don't want to like stop one king from coming to see his birthday brother. I mean, geez. All right, so I can go down this silly road all day long, but nobody wants that. No. So well, maybe they do. I don't know what they want, but I'm not going to give them all of that. I'm going to hold some of that back for if I ever turn into a stand-up comic or something.
But always have a fallback. That's the thing.
Yeah, exactly. Always have a second angle. Right. But Nick, when I made a call for people, and I was very excited when you said, "Oh man, if you want to do a podcast, I would do one," because you had been on my list of people I wanted to talk to for a while.
Yep.
So I'm glad that you wanted to do this, because then it makes it a whole lot easier, because then it's like I don't feel like I'm imposing.
Totally.
I've learned that I'm not. People love this thing, and I
No,
love
it's
to do it.
great.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fun. I like, again, like going back to the when we first ran into each other in Australia. Um,
Mhm.
I don't. This is not let me ta- not in any way something that's supposed to be super serious.
Mhm.
It does teach people, but like if we're not having fun, the people listening aren't going to have fun.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably true of your class at Columbia as well. Is like part of the job of being a professor is taking the knowledge in your head and getting it into the head of the students. And with so many challenges, you have to be an entertainer, and so
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting. When I first started doing the teaching, it was a lot of like, okay, I'm going to prepare a material and I'm going to figure out how to deliver it. And then somewhere after a couple of years of doing it, I realized it's a lot better for me to like, yeah, I need to be prepared. I need to have some slides ready to go. But so much better if I actually just sort of like sit down and let them all start debating back and forth with each other. And then I just get to referee, right? It's so much more interesting doing it that way than me just kind of droning on of 18 slides of repetitive information. So I've really enjoyed it. I've done it for 6 or 7 years now at this point.
Well, let me ask you about this, because this is I teach occasionally an executive MBA course in brand management.
Okay.
And my joke is always that I can teach the class in about an hour. Because the basics of, I mean, there's a lot of like minutia that we can get into, but the
Mhm.
fundamentals of it are like, hey, look, who am I targeting? What's my position? How I'm going to show up in the market. I mean, that's basically everything you need to know. And
Yep.
then the rest of it's just sort of theatrics on my behalf. But what I've learned is, like, yes, the part about the students um, learning, debating and finding their way into the material is so much more valuable. And right, to me, I'm just like a guide. But the question I
Mhm.
wanted to ask is like, well, if I were to put that kind of idea to you, like, is there like a core of like ideas that you try to get across to the students? And like, if you get like two or three things through to them, then you've been successful.
Yes, it's a little bit of like we want to make sure that they have the basic information about ticketing, and many of them intend to graduate and become producers or general managers, right? There have been some people who have, but the vast majority of them are not leaving that course and becoming ticketing managers or directors of ticketing or directors of sales or something like that. So we want to make sure that they have the basic information so that they feel informed professionally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say the biggest things we try to get across are about having the right level of preparation that it sets them up to be able to make adjustments when needed, right? And sometimes those things are counterintuitive, because sometimes you think, okay, well, if I'm doing all of this preparation, then I'm locking things in stone, and I'm kind of ordaining what the future of my production is going to be. And really it's kind of the opposite, that the more prepared you are ahead of time, the more you're giving yourself 5 or 6 different paths that you're able to go down in the moment. The one other thing that I would say about teaching, and then that's my night gig, so we can talk a little bit more about what I've been doing over the years that took up the real 40 hours of the week. But the other thing that I think the course and the program really provides is a network of relationships. And I've continued to be impressed with the fact that, and it's not everybody, right? I might have 9 students per year, and I'm not maintaining this relationship with all 9 of them every year. but there's usually 1 or 2 students per cohort that I'm establishing a long-term relationship with, sometimes a true mentoring relationship, which I think is really special, actually, and a really awesome opportunity for me. But really what you're buying in a lot of those programs is the network and the relationships, and having that ready to tap into in the moment when you need it. And then building into it when the moments are there where you have the ability to provide back.
Yeah. To mirror that point, I mean, the class, when I teach these classes, they're usually a lot, like much larger than 9 students. But yeah, even in a large, and that's only to say not like, oh, Dave's a better professor, because no, it's just a more broadly accessible course. It's not, it has nothing to do with my teaching skills. There's probably, as a percentage, you have a higher percentage, but there's probably 2 or 3 students every class that like really stick around, and it is, to me, it's really great, because what it makes me do is I have to work hard to maintain my relevance, to make myself still useful and valuable, right? I can't rest on my laurels and my knowledge. I have to like make sure it's active, and that's also part of the really great part about teaching, right? And and being because even like you had have had this just tremendous career with Disney, but at the same time you were at Disney for a long time, and it can become very easy to just see the world through that one set of like challenges and that one set of like solutions, and so like that, to me, that's been the valuable thing about the teaching, but also like the stuff that I've done and the stuff that you're starting to do now, which is and which was the trick that I just pulled on you, which you didn't even realize, was that like the talking about the teaching was actually helping set up the longer conversation. You see, this is where the character I play comes into play, because one of the interesting things you just mentioned was you like to teach kids about students. I always call them kids. I don't know why, because most of them are like totally.
These are people with children of their own, right?
Exactly.
But every so often they lapse into the same thing and say kids.
Yes, and I'm like always like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like such a jerk. But you're talking about making preparation, and and telling and showing people that if you spend the time on preparation, it doesn't limit your opportunities and your solutions. It expands them, and to me, the way you put it is like really that lesson that I try to teach everybody here in the newsletter, in class, which is strategy before tactics. And for you, and it's a really good way of expressing it, you had this really cool job at Disney where you kind of oversaw like and I don't want to try to even sell everything you did here, but you kind of oversaw like a lot of the ticketing for Disney on Broadway, and like in all these all these venues all over the place, and that, and so I want to ask you about that, because that seems like if you weren't good at being prepared and you weren't good at doing strategy, this would have been a job that would have overwhelmed you, and not just you, anybody. I mean, it's because it's like if you aren't prepared and planning, it'd be impossible to keep up. But maybe I'm missing something.
No, I think you're right. I mean, one of the things that I really loved about my role and my time there, and mind you, and you've alluded to it, but just to frame it up, it was 18 years that I was there, so I've seen a lot and experienced a lot of different moments within the organization, but there was so often, for much of the time that I was there, this sense that the institution was the thing that was most important, and the thing that provided was a great deal of buffer on the sides to deal with the moments that were challenging, right? Because it wasn't about, okay, this week was bad, we have to figure out how to literally figure out how to fix this one particular moment, and it's a fire drill, and let's go deal with this one thing. You were able to say, okay, what is my next 52 weeks going to be like? What's the strategy I'm going to put into place? I can recall, it's, we're recording this on December 5th. And for years, people would always say to me, like, oh, it's December, it's the holidays in New York City. It must be really busy for you right now. And I would always kind of look at them, and, I figured out how not to be rude about it after a while. But I was kind of like, December, we had figured out 6 to 9 months ago, right? If I'm still trying to figure out December in December, then I messed up somewhere along the way, right? December needs to be figured out back in June, needs to be figured out back in March. Really, the work for December begins again on January 1st. Yep. And then you just keep working that process. And it struck me that not everybody works that way, and that, December gets solved in the moment. And there's something to be said about urgency, and there's something to be said about responding to the dynamics of the market. But so long as you're in a safe place that really allows you to navigate and work the strategy that you've laid out, you achieve a level of efficiency that unlocks so much more opportunity in the long run. That's at least my take on it.
Oh, I think that's absolutely correct. It's we were talking about some stuff earlier about, and I think that my experience on Broadway was like, yes, I would be physically busy in December, but I would not be mentally busy with December in December. Yep. Mentally, I was thinking about December in, like you said, January. Right. And then as my career, especially around Broadway, grew, I was often thinking about, let's say January of, this is like December of 2025, which we are now. I would have been thinking about December of 2025 in June of 2020, in July of 2023. Because by the nature of things. Yeah. Yep. So I agree with it. And I think that I've built a lot of stuff over the years now on just like that recognition. And I think that, like, when people, which I'll be curious to ask you about, one of the things that has made me resilient and have the ability to be somewhat successful is that ability to, like, never get trapped in the way you talk about solving the moment of December in December, right? It's like, oh, and let me be able to lift my head up and look at the horizon and see where I'm actually at and where things are going, so that I can make a plan for how to deal with it, which is one of the things I think you've been working on now, which is you called it AI preparedness. And I was curious about it because what I'm interested in about AI, which is very little, if I'm being completely honest, because to me it's a tool, right? And this is my bias, not anybody else's bias. Is I'm worried about that plan, right? Like 12, 15, 18 months in advance. And what I liked about how you described it was that, like, you're telling people, like, it's not the ins and outs of how you're going to deal with it. It's like how you're going to be prepared to use it to make it valuable for you. Is that right? And what does it mean?
Well, so it feels like we're all very much functioning in either an AI or an AI adjacent world right now, right? You're starting to see encroachment on traditional search. It's funny we call it traditional. I remember a time when the reliance on search wasn't in place in the way that it is now, but it is. But you're starting to see this ebb out of search and into people using the AI platform of their choice to do a lot of search and discovery as a consumer, right? And it's important to be mindful of that. And I think the more that people play with it, both in a professional and a personal setting, I think that's all really valuable. But where I'm really focused is in laying the groundwork for brands, venues, entertainment entities about understanding where the technology is likely to be in the future, because it's less about our use of it to go create copy or to perfect our emails or even to do that, that discovery and research kind of work, and more about, okay, what are these platforms going to be able to do as operators on our behalf in the future? And what's interesting about it is that we've spent literally the last 20 years developing the prettiest, most beautiful, most seamless websites for people to interact with. And in many ways, it's almost the exact opposite of what we need to be creating for AI platforms to go operate on. And so there's this world where you're actually potentially even developing like two websites at the same time, right? So this idea of preparedness is maybe not even necessarily saying, okay, I have the perfect view of what I think the consumer wants and the way I'm going to interact with them. It's actually almost like having two different experiences out there, because while you may only be at 10% of your traffic is being driven by, AI platforms at this point, there's going to be a tipping point, and you can't wait until that tipping point has happened to start spinning up what your solution is. You need to start having that solution in place now.
Yeah, it's so I asked that when I asked you that, I was asking it so that I would seem kind of like a curmudgeonly, I think, is be the best way to put it.
Yeah,
because I totally play with I play with the AI all the time, and I think the point you're making and the point I like to see addressed about it is like going, don't get caught up in where everything is now, because this is just the first like early iteration. This is like I remember when like the first rudimentary websites, and this is what it is, and where the value, I think, where the extreme value for people comes in, is where coming down the road, right? I don't necessarily buy the idea that it's going to, like, AI is going to steal all our jobs and like all of that stuff. But what I do think the tool will be able to do, and this is like some of the examples you were giving, it's like there's synthetic data, and I've seen synthetic data being used to help people come up with market research that they would have a hard time creating on their own. Right. And it's only synthetic in the fact that they have these huge these huge models that they're able to operate from. It's data, it's distilled data, because people are more reluctant to fill out surveys. That's one of the challenges, and so understanding what synthetic data looks like, understanding, and this is what I'm curious about, that one, but also like the idea of zero-click searches, and the impact that'll have, because I don't know that I've heard anybody really talking about that in regards to like selling tickets or producing plays, driving people, creating fans.
Yeah. It's funny because, I play with these platforms a bit, right? Probably, I don't even necessarily consider myself an expert user necessarily, but I certainly dabble in it a bit. And every so often it'll start spinning off in a particular direction. I literally need to say, like, please stop, like, you're wrong, and I need you to back up and do this thing over. And sometimes it like apologizes to me, and sometimes it like sometimes the level of trying to pump me up emotionally is really funny. But it's true.
It's definitely true, because I do the same thing.
Right. And it's not there yet, right? Like you can't say, okay, this is going to be the solution to all of my problems. But the way we're preparing our businesses is very different than the way we might be thinking about it as consumers. And I find this in the AI conversation. I find this in pricing and yield management conversations. I find this in CRM and SMS and email communications. Don't make business decisions purely with your own wallet or your own style or your own preferences in mind. You have to let the data tell you what the answer is, because, I'm weird, you're weird. Like, we're all weird in our own ways. And so if we simply only use our own personal prism of weirdness to be the decider of what our brands are going to be saying, then we just become carbon copies of our own personal self. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most effective or most efficient way for the organization to run. So that I am, like, you talk about data and the importance of it. Like, I am passionately focused on let the data tell you what the answer to the question is, because it's going to get you in the right direction.
Yeah, I the way you put it was the way my frustration with data is that, like, people just assume that the data is going to give you the accurate answer, but the important thing is know what the question is, and that question is built in understanding what people want and need. And the way you talked about, like, we're all weird in our own way, which is 100% correct. The way I teach people, and I have a really, like, obnoxious example that I'm going to share with everybody just now, but I say you are not the customer. And so the issue that you face, right, is like, I love I'm sure you love the Lion King, after all these years, and
Absolutely.
So you're an awful arbiter of how you should sell the Lion King, because you know it in and out. Yeah. But
I also haven't paid for a ticket for it in 20 years. So
yeah, exactly. Neither have I. So I mean, it's freaking amazing. I love the thing. It's the most incredible show on Broadway, but I haven't paid for a ticket for it in about 25 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But so what happens, though, or at least, and this is my experience, is that people fall back on that, like, I'm going to, and here's the example. It's like, you go into these meetings, you sit in the boardroom, and it's always some white guy who's an executive sitting there, like, loosens the tie, like, flexes the shoulders and goes, I'm going to tell you what the customer wants. I'm going to tell you what the customer needs, and you can't do that because that's dangerous. Mm-hmm. You have to be willing to, like, have a little humility to you to be able to step back and say, what does somebody want? Right. And it's, even a good example of this is, like, even in the core group of New Yorkers, like, we would be bad examples because we weren't coming to Broadway from out of town. We were part of Broadway. Right. You have to figure out, like, the people I'm trying to attract, what do they really think is valuable? What do they need from this experience? And then go out and let the data tell you the answer, as opposed to trying to, which most of the time it gets flipped. And you, like, look at the data to look for the question that you're solving for. I'm like, figure out what the question is.
Take it even a step further. If you're talking specifically about Broadway audiences, it certainly varies by show. But a plurality are international tourists, right? Mm-hmm. So, you can't even begin to effectively put yourself in those shoes, because the vast majority of people who are working on Broadway shows in New York aren't international tourists to the U.S., making that once or maybe twice in a lifetime journey to New York. So it's really challenging to kind of shift your mindset and to think about it from that kind of perspective.
100%. And when I make that point that I make it specifically to usually, hopefully, to generate a laugh. But at the same time, it's like, you want to make sure that people understand that, like, it's okay. This is a common challenge that you're doing.
Right.
The skill comes in being able to, like, know, like, you're about to say this really ridiculous thing. And at least with me, I say the ridiculous thing, like, this is what I think. And then I go, and then I catch myself and I go, but I'm not the person who's buying it. and then being willing, like being able to make the mistake, admit the mistake, and then take the action to rectify it. Because you just have to be humble enough to go like, I don't know all the answers, but I do know how to find them for you.
Right.
And that's what I like about these, the way you've approached this, because I think it's very easy for people to fall into the trap of like what's immediate, putting out the December fire in December, which is kind of like what a lot of AI adaptation is right now, and in not planning for December 2025 and June of 2023.
I even think of it in terms of a lot of the selling that we do, because one of the things that I did at Disney, in addition to leading their sales and ticketing team from a yield management perspective, and in addition to overseeing direct to consumer marketing, I also had a pure sales team in place. And I feel like this is the case with a lot of sales teams, both in terms of entertainment and sports. There's so much about okay, convert the sale right now, immediately. And there's value in that for sure, but also it's the relationship development and laying the long-term groundwork for things that is hugely important. So I even think of it on that sort of personal side in terms of selling. I think you could even say it also in terms of team development, right? There's work that we as leaders and executives can do very early on when we're hiring talent to identify where those stars are, but at the same time accept the fact that the star, we talk about kids, star may be a kid, right? And you've got to do the work to invest in them and to develop them and to bring them up over a long tail career. And that's part of the fun as well. I mean, again, it goes back to the teaching thing. It's how do you develop that next generation of leaders and executives to do that work? That's a big part of the role in these jobs, is just making sure that you're figuring out, who the next generation is.
Yeah, and really providing them opportunities, right? To me, I think the biggest value that I often am able to give people now is I give them cover a lot of times, right? It's like I have the relationship with their boss or their manager or an executive in their organization, and they'll listen to me because I'm me, like the same way they'll listen to you because you're you, right? And like you have a track record and like have experience that like going, oh, I'd got to pay attention to Dave or Nick because they know what they're talking about, right? And even if that's maybe only like partly true, right? Because there's some stuff that like there's a halo effect to certain things that that maybe not entirely true, but it's okay. You go with it. It's giving them but giving these younger folks the opportunity to present an idea that maybe would not get the same space that it needs, because I think one of the issues, if we're talking about, how do you prepare for AI, and then how do you keep the business growing, understanding like that humility, all these things, is that people are afraid to make mistakes, or they don't have the ability to make a mistake. And the cool thing about what you did with Disney was that, like, obviously you had a lot of room to make mistakes because, that's sort of the nature of an organization that big, is there's a lot of tests that go on, right? There's a lot of like, you make a lot of like, you do. I mean, I know this from having not worked with you specifically at Disney, but working with similar organizations, a lot of research that goes on, a little more forgiving because the investment in the brand has been so consistent and so large over so many years. All these things go on. It gives you but the nice thing is it gives you a little more freedom.
Absolutely.
with a lot of kids and students and young people that are coming up, the challenge is that they don't have that freedom, and
Right.
and the challenge I would because I know there'll be like a wide breadth of people that will be listening to this, is like for some of those executives and leaders to remember that, like, going, listen, I can't tell you how often I screwed up. It's like, give those people that are like working for you now and that are growing into like those roles you have, give them the freedom to make the same mistakes and if they're like me, make the same bonehead mistakes that I made as a kid.
Yep. The way I frame it up, and I often say this about when I'm hiring, is there's 3 non-negotiables. You have to be smart, you have to be hardworking, and you have to have integrity. Other than that, and so not only do you establish that as the requirement when you're hiring, but also establish that as the requirement for how you're being judged once you're actually in the role. So long as you're satisfying those 3 things, the mistakes are all opportunities. I understand different products, different enterprises have a greater tolerance of loss or a different tolerance for risk. I get that. And obviously a corporation as large as Disney and, brands like The Lion King and Aladdin and Frozen, they all kind of function kind of there's a great deal of latitude there that exists. But I would say, opening up and giving that opportunity for freedom and for mistakes is what grows that next generation. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, my thing to everybody is like, if you need a shield, then use me, because
right,
it's like
totally.
What's anybody gonna say to me or about me now that they haven't already said? It's fine.
Right.
But I feel that one thing that since we've gotten off into this, that I would encourage people to consider is that if you're operating in a smaller, like maybe it's just a solo, like one show or a smaller organization, you also need to be careful about trying to mimic what everybody else is doing, because you don't have the budgets, you don't have the same material that you're working with, you don't have a lot, the circumstances are different. And one thing that I think is a trap that people fall into is doing what gets defined as best practices, but I usually find it's that race to the bottom kind of mentality.
Yep.
And it's frustrating, because the thing is and you're learning this now, but I knew this a long time ago, which is that, like, when you're just you, right, out there on your own, like I can't fight with, like, in sports business like Elevate or Legends or any of those, around consulting and like pricing tickets and branding and everything, because it's just me. So I have to do things differently. And that would be the lesson I would like to impart on people as well, is that, like, if you're not, really, no matter where you're coming from, run your own race, because there's a lot of just Me Too kind of attitude about, like, well, this is what everybody else is doing. And it reminds me of that. My parents never said this to me, but I've heard the thing of, like, if all your friends are jumping off that bridge, are you going to do it too? It's the same kind of thinking.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Now, there was an area of what you're working on now that was pretty interesting to me. All right. And we touched on the hospitality and the tourist stuff, and I'm going to circle back to that in a second. But you talked to me when we were preparing for the episode about the evolution of distribution, and how, like, there's just greater access to inventory and opportunities on platforms. I was curious about that, and I, like, really held my tongue, so I didn't ask you before we started recording this, so that you could explain this to me now, and I would be like going, oh yeah, like, really, like, on top of it, and I could ask questions that would benefit everybody and not just me.
Cool. So I would say over the last couple of years, there's been a pretty notable shift on Broadway in terms of what had been the access points to obtaining tickets as a consumer. And it used to be like, okay, there was Ticketmaster, there was Telecharge, and then you may have your own sort of like personal way of accessing ticket inventory. And I think two things happened through COVID. One, a lot of by sort of breaking down and having to restart over from scratch, the industry learned that they needed to work together in ways that they never did before, and that working together as an industry leads to more of a positive than working in opposition. And then two, the ubiquity of technology and the way that consumers are able to access choices on demand. And so the couple of years since has really led to this evolution where everybody is selling everything. All venue owners, not all 100%, but we're certainly moving in that direction. But essentially every venue owner sells every show on Broadway. And now we are getting really close to where I think increasingly entities that may not necessarily be the venue owner, but the sort of like next line out of distributors, whether that be in the online travel agency space, whether that be on, Broadway specific distribution platforms, whether that be a little more willingness in terms of marketplaces that have traditionally been on the resale side, whether that be in true like fan to fan connectivity of inventory. Like a lot of the walls around access to distribution are really opening up on Broadway. And that, the sports world has always been, particularly in the resale world, much more accommodating of it. But it's interesting how it is starting to move in that direction on Broadway in New York. And it feels like we're about to get to a point where some of that's starting to happen on the road, as well as for some global destinations as well, where there's just a different way of thinking about distribution.
Yeah, it was interesting to me because, you were like going, oh, this is like these things happened 7 or so years ago about some of the stuff I did, and I was like, oh no, this was like 20 years ago, and they was like going, oh my God, it was really ahead of the time, and I was like, yes. And has been interesting about this idea of distribution and opening up distribution and really being more thoughtful about the holistic nature of how to sell Broadway was the idea of the way that it works with resale. Because one of the things that I think people may not necessarily appreciate is how closely Broadway worked with a lot of trusted secondary market partners in the past, and that went away with these platforms. So because the necessity wasn't there, because then it was people just could go on Ticketmaster or you Playbill, and get a coupon, or all these different ways that we go to get tickets. They could skirt the box office, and what happened was that then there was like less just consistency in the sales patterns and in demand. And really, to me, the biggest challenge was like these brokers and these like concierges, like all of these like secondary sellers, they were marketing agents for all these different shows and venues. And so and this is what has come out of my conversations with people, and I'm curious if your experience is different with this, is that put a big hole in the ability to sell those tickets, so that recreating how they were sold was not just like a desire and a need, it was necessary, because there was this huge gap. And I'll use my example was like, we would have, like we were talking about the planning thing. It's like we would be buying like $1 million of tickets for like the 3 months, October, November, December, like high tourist season, but we'd be buying them like 18 months in advance sometimes. And that would help like those venues like be able to plan as well. Like, is this show, can it make it? Is there, can this show continue? Does it need to move, with Disney, do we need to move it to a different venue? When do we need to move it to a different venue? When's the New Amsterdam going to open up for a new show? Things like that.
Yep. I do think the thing that happened that kind of tripped it up is that the timeline on which consumers were willing to evolve their technology use was different than how fast venues and rights holders were willing to evolve their technology use. And so consumers were getting further ahead, but the platforms that were available to deliver inventory to them weren't there yet, and they're still not, actually. I would still say that the system lags where the consumer is willing to be at this point. But I think that is what's motivating a lot of the evolution that's happening, is that the sheer market forces are going to move people to become more and more comfortable. By people, I mean the rights holders, more and more comfortable with using technology as a solution for distribution.
Yeah. And it's interesting talking to you about this too, because I know that the way Disney works is like they're very sophisticated in the 4 Ps, the product, price, place, and promotion of marketing. And this distribution thing, right? Place. There's always this talk about like open distribution is going to save everything. And so at the same time, like I'm having this discussion with you now, and like I understand having all the companies be able to sell different things, and a more comprehensive conversation about this. I don't necessarily see open distribution as like the complete solution. What I see though is that like I'm heartened by the idea that people are having a more comprehensive and complex and modern conversation about how they're distributing their tickets.
I think that's true. And I agree with you that open distribution in and of itself is not the path to limitless demand, right? There is a fixed amount of demand that exists out there. And yeah, with each individual distribution channel that's getting opened up, you might be able to spin up a little bit of incremental demand that wouldn't otherwise be aware of your event or complete the transaction, or if nothing else, you need to be on the shelf and you need to compete with them or with other shows. It's more about the fact that the consumer craves, even if they aren't saying it this way, but they crave technology and efficiency. Mm-hmm. And if you're putting hurdles in their way, that's the thing that's ultimately going to turn them off, right? So distribution doesn't come without its downsides. Distribution comes at a cost. Every additional distributor out there is weighing on the ecosystem. There's additional literal physical costs. There's challenges in terms of credit card processing. There's loss of brand integrity. There's data disintermediation between the rights holder and the actual attendee, and having distribution in place makes that even harder. It doesn't make it easier. So there's lots of downsides to distribution, no questions asked. But one of the things that distribution does is that it spurs on improvement in efficiency of technology, and it satisfies the consumer where they want to be satisfied. Because at the end of the day, remember, like I was saying, we're talking to fickle consumers who have lots of other things that are on their minds, both whether it be other entertainment in their home, the fact that they got to go pick their kids up at school. There's 101 other things that might take up and occupy their 24 hours of thinking per day. And you need to figure out how to get that bar as low as possible.
Yes, right. Because what I try to teach people is that the status quo is usually your biggest competitor. So you have to like create an incentive for people to take the action that you want them to. And as you pointed out, distribution isn't priceless. It comes with severe prices, especially when it's done thoughtlessly. And this is my challenge with the open distribution advocates, is that often that open distribution is a synonym, or is meant as thoughtless distribution, just like spray and pray. And it doesn't work for me.
Yeah. I would also say one other thing this conversation kind of puts me in the mind of, is this increased cynicism almost about brands, and a lack of trust about how we as consumers are being sold to. And the way I think that's manifesting itself is the way that consumers and people are reshaping the entities that they trust. And so I'm going to give two examples of that. So when you do brand advertising, you're clearly communicating that you are selling somebody something, right? And they are going to have a natural skepticism to that. So two ways that I think this is changing a little bit are, one, so are you familiar with the theater app on Broadway? THEATR?
Loosely, but not everybody will be.
So it is a basically fan-to-fan transfer distribution solution, and it opens up the ability for people holding tickets, whether their situation has changed, whether they aren't able to go, whether they bought 3 but they only need 2, and opens up the ability to, in a secure environment, transfer that ticket to another person in a way that has always previously sort of been dealt with through the traditional resale model. But the resale model is kind of burdened with all of the sort of negative brand about, oh my gosh, like ticket prices and the way those are being repriced, and who's trying to, bad instances where resale and fraud have overlapped with each other. So this idea of actually connecting fans, connecting guests and consumers, where there's this more inherent trust, because it's almost like the sale is coming from another person just like you, it gives it a lot more credibility, right? So it's a platform that I'm particularly interested in right now. And then, not even thinking about live entertainment, I'm also a bit of a YouTube nut these days. So it's literally,
I think you're misselling this as nut. You are like a content creator and a super fan of YouTube, I think would be accurate.
I am a super fan. It is literally my streaming video content of choice, right? I've got Netflix, there's Hulu, there's Disney Plus, there's all of that. There's even Amazon Prime. I absolutely spend the most time consuming video content via YouTube. And the minute you see branded content on YouTube, it just like, you smell it from a mile away and you're like, I'm suspicious and I don't believe it. But the minute you have some sort of a trusted, I always hesitate to use the word influencer because there's a bit of a connotation to it. So I'm going to use the word content creator. But as soon as you've got a trusted content creator communicating with you, it's like, oh, I believe this. I give value to it. I give validity to it. And that exists on other platforms as well, right? You can get that on TikTok. You can get that on Instagram as well. But there's something about YouTube and the investment of time, because whereas you might spend seconds consuming content on Instagram, you're consuming minutes, sometimes even hours of content on YouTube. So I think it is a really untapped platform for a lot of brands. I think a lot of it is because the content that brands create on YouTube is just, it doesn't understand the medium properly.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it's incumbent.
That's a lot of brand marketing, just period these days. It's just like
totally.
It's just lazy, is what I think is what it comes across as. It's not. It's. I'll say it. I'll use cheap, but like the brand stuff, right? The top of the funnel stuff that, again, like your background is just, you have been covered in it for decades. And, it's like what I preach is like, it's obviously you're selling something because you're always like any of this stuff you're selling, but it's that emotion. You're like really the first thing you're selling is like that hit of just pure, like whatever the pure emotion you want to get at. It's like joy or excitement or anticipation. And it just misses the mark so many cases because the sale is so heavy and so clumsy and oftentimes like inappropriate to the relationship that you have.
It's so slick when it cries out for a moment of reality and a moment of personal connection. And yeah, I think the brands that are going to win are the ones that figure out how to really amplify and ignite that kind of work by creators that isn't just literally being like synthetically cooked up in the marketing lab. Like, like it needs to have humanity to it.
Which is like sort of funny that you said it like that, because that's what I think of those Chat GPT brand building ads. It's like they have definitely just been cooked up in the lab. I mean, what they're trying to do is absolutely correct, but the execution of it is absolutely not correct.
Well, it's also ironic that the person who is saying this is the person who spent 18 years at Disney, where I think lots of people would say, well, talk about, synthetic marketing construct with a desired goal behind it. But I will say, I spent 18 years there, and now I'm, heading out on the road to go identify what, my next opportunities are. But at the end of the day, I would say one of the things I really enjoyed about being at the company is it was real people doing real work. And so there was actually a humanity there. Yes. So it's a bit ironic because I think oftentimes the Walt Disney Company gets that kind of rap of being synthetic. But that wasn't my experience, to be honest.
To be clear with everybody, it's like I think it's a challenge that can happen in any large organization. The further away from the customer you get, the easier it is to lose that humanity. And so when I think people make that accusation about Disney, it's like they see these actions that are happening a long way away from the customer. When I meet people from the theme parks, or I meet people like you that are like on Broadway, or just any people that are closer to the customer, the level of humanity is great, and like the power of the brand as a way to generate emotions and connections and do all those positive things that brands can do for you is still extremely evident. So I think that I know I'm asking a lot of people, but I think you have to keep that thought in mind. Because it's, I still remember I know a woman who like part of her like job was really about like making sure that like all of the smells and all were in the parks were consistent and going out in the right way and delivered in the right manner. And there's so much like thought, and I mean, some of it's like, like probably rightfully would be considered manipulative, but like some of it was like just such incredible like thoughtfulness in the way that like a smell can transport somebody and it can create this emotional connection and all these cool things. So so there you're right, there is a balance there, but there's great humanity. And I don't think that necessarily, and selling things is not necessarily a bad thing, because that's how we continue to add value and keep things going. I think it's selling things without the attention to people, the focus on like providing value, and I think one of the things you talked about was like focusing on that long-term relationship. I think then those things will make people feel a little bit sketchy.
Right. Yep. I agree.
Yeah. So Nick, I see, like, I'm looking at my clock here. We have gone for quite a while. I think probably what this means is that at some point we'll probably have to do a second one, because we still didn't even really get to touch on hospitality and tourism, and we only really got loosely to the long form content creation. But I did get to plug you as a actually, how did you describe it? You are the data and analytics department of your wife's YouTube channel.
I'm the analytics manager of my wife's YouTube channel. Yes. Which is Five Hungry Travelers. So it's about channel focusing on travel with kids with dietary restrictions. There's a whole host of interesting stuff on there. Some Disney, some cruise lines, some airline stuff. Lots of interesting stuff. I'm already thinking about all the stories I need to tell you on the next time that we do this. And then I would say, in the meantime, anyone who is interested in learning a little bit more about me, probably the best way to find out is on LinkedIn. Again, it's Nicholas Falzon, and people can reach out to me there, follow me there. I'm happy to connect with folks on that platform. And, in this time when I'm sort of moving on to my next thing, I imagine most of the other than this podcast, most of the content that I'm going to be putting out is going to be there on LinkedIn.
Oh, I thought you were going to say YouTube.
No, I have thought about it, and I might get there eventually. But in the meantime, I've already got a pretty decent following on LinkedIn, so I think I'm going to leverage that for the moment until the camera just calls out for me to be on it.
Yeah.
Which I say with both of our cameras turned off right now.
That's exactly right. That's amazing.
There you have it. Yeah.
Well, Nick, man, I appreciate you doing this. Thank you so much.
Awesome, sir. I appreciate it too. Thank you.
Do me a favor and let me know what you think of my conversation with Nick by sending me an email. It is my name, dave@davewakeman.com. Make sure you check out my website. It is davewakeman.com, and get the Talking Tickets newsletter at not www, but talkingtickets.substack.com. Keep an eye on the davewakeman.com site and the Talking Tickets website, because there's going to be a lot of stuff coming up in the new year. This episode's going live on December 15th, so I'm going to be releasing results from the survey, which I'm going to stick a link in the show notes in case you haven't already shared your insights with me. I'm still collecting them, ongoing thing, but a whole bunch of other stuff. So there's just tons of exciting stuff coming up in the new year. So check it out. As always, you're an hour into this podcast, so I know you love it. So do me a favor, rate it and review the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with a colleague or friend or somebody who would gain insight from a conversation like this one with Nick, the ones with Matt Wolf, some of the other exciting ones that I've had this year. It helps the podcast grow, gives me a little positive encouragement, the whole deal. It's great. As I always say, especially at the holidays, thank you so much for listening. I couldn't do this without you, and I'll talk to you again soon. Take it easy.